This is John,
Romans.
not Romans, John, starting with chapter 13. Now we're into the full-on beginning of the Passion. We're going to have someone read from 13. This is Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Some of these passages are going to seem very familiar to you all because for those of you who are year-longers or who have been connecting us online, these are the passages that have formed much of the lectionary this past liturgical season of Lent. Could I get a volunteer to read up to page 20, or up to verse 20?
20?
Verse 20.
All right.
Is this your amplified version?
Yes.
All right.
So it'll have a little explanation.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. Now, before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that his hour had come, and it was the time for him to leave the world and return to the Father. Having greatly loved his own who were in the world, he loved them and continuously loves them with his perfect love to the end, eternally. It is during supper, when the devil had already put the thought of betraying Jesus into the heart of Judas, Simon's son, that Jesus, knowing that the Father had put everything into his hands and that he had come from God and was now returning to God, got up from the supper, took off his outer robe, and taking a servant towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into the basin and began washing the disciples' feet and wiping them with the towel, which was tied around his waist. When he came to Simon Peter, he said to him, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied to him, you do not realize what I am doing, but you will fully understand it later. Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash your feet, you have no part with me. We can have nothing to do with each other. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, in that case, wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, anyone who has bathed needs only to wash his feet and is completely clean. And you, my disciples, are clean, but not all of you. For he knew he was going to be betrayed. He knew who was going to betray him. For the reason he said, not all of you are clean.
I'll stop you there. Let's stop it because it actually breaks there nicely. All right. So what are you hearing in that? It's a familiar passage. What's anything standing out to you?
Insisted on washing everyone's feet for a reason.
The reason wasn't clear to people.
No, yeah. I don't think it's clear to people in our present day either.
Right.
Yeah. The passage, if you wash your feet, you're clean all over it, kind of different.
Well, he said you've already bathed.
Well, so this deals with ritualistic cleansing. When before you would go into the temple, you would have a ritualistic bath, which is why the baptism of John the Baptist was one of repentance, but it wasn't an uncommon thing to baptize. Because as much as there were ritualistic baths, and this is the jars that Jesus changed water into wine were used for that sort of thing as well. They're sacred, in that regard. But that bath is what he's referring to in the terms of this is not that. They're mixing his metaphor, and he's making sure it's clear. This is not a ritualistic bath. It's not preparation for anything. This is where some traditions who hold foot washing as a sacrament, or as, I would say we hold it as sacramental, but I would say even in the Presbyterian church or in a lot of Protestant churches, we use it more as a memorial, but I even think we mix it up. I mean, I've been a part of foot washing, I've done foot washings, we've all been a part of these. I've said this before, at the Monday, Thursday meal, we often mix those up and make them about humility. Like, I'm willing to touch your feet. Like, that's not what this past.
Yeah, and it's not, let me show you how we serve the community, because we go out and wash people's feet.
Yes. And when we try to do that, I mean, and I've done it, I think, and I'm not saying there's not a time for it. And I think it's memorialistic to say, hey, let's remember this act, but let's also then have teaching around what the act was about. In some sense, it is about humility, but it's not about humility to wash someone's feet. It's about humility to do the daily tasks in turning those daily tasks in some ways holy. I don't know if you've ever heard of the author, Brother Lawrence. He writes a book called Practicing the Presence of God. And one of the things that stood out to me in the book was, and to this day, when is that washing dishes can be an act of holiness when we go into it with that mindset. Same thing is true, and then the mundane task, and I've said all this before in terms about the foot washing. The commandment, though, to love one another, that's coming in this next section, is not about commandment to wash feet. It's a commandment to do the very thing that the foot washing represents. I've shared that Anne Lamott, I don't remember the Anne Lamott illustration. She goes in, Anne Lamott's a popular author, Presbyterian. She writes a lot about writing, and anyway, she's a writer, writes books. Not all, some Christian, some not, but one of her most known ones is called Traveling Mercies, and in that she writes about the fact that when she was a single parent, had a child, and was exhausted, trying to, a newborn. She's watching television, I'm going to screw up the story probably, and your knock comes on the door, and it's the associate pastor of the church, and says, "What do you need done?" And she's like, "Nothing, I'm fine," and he's, no, like, what is it that, like, you just would really wish you had the strength to do, but it's just so overwhelming? And she said, "My bathroom's a disaster." So she writes about sitting on the sofa nursing her newborn son and just weeping, like, because the associate pastor's in there scrubbing the tub, scrubbing the toilet, leaving, and that is a foot washing. And so I get tired personally, sometimes of churches trying to memorialize this as if that's what we're supposed to do. No, I'd rather say go out and clean someone's bathroom. And if everyone who wanted to participate in a foot washing cleaned someone's bathroom who needed it, again, the world would be a very different place. So
Jason, it says anyone who is bathed only needs to wash his feet and will be completely clean.
yes.
And then he says
Yep.
that one of you is not, because he knows that one of them is going to betray him. He knows who it is, but he's saying that you're not completely clean. Does that mean
He is shifting, and see, this is what, this is one of these passages, and I feel bad for the disciples, because I'm like, Jesus, really? Like, you shift gears right in the middle of the, it's not, because he takes a real life example of a practical need, he takes it and turns it into a servanthood example, and then uses the same concept of clean and not clean, but what he's playing off is Peter's comment, not on his own. Like, Jesus is trying to demonstrate something, but Peter doesn't understand it, and that's where he says, not only my feet, but my hands. And Jesus said, the one who is bathed, meaning you've been bathed, you've been sanctified, you're in the clear, you don't need to, you're clean, but your feet still need to be washed practically. This is the notion of we're redeemed, but we still live in this world.
Right, and I take it, you could apply that it's he who's been bathed, so I know it's early, but he who's been filled with the Spirit has been redeemed, still in need to confess and be restored.
It's it's honestly, in an Eastern context, it's the yin and the yang. You may have been sanctified, but there's still a dark spot in the white, in that purity. And that's a means, and that's how it's going to be until we're out of this earthly vessel. So, and he knows. Yeah, the question is does he? What extent does he know? I mean, like this, and so here two things to note. Also, John completely no words of institution, no going up to a preparation of Last Supper, curated text. This is not a narrative of Jesus's events. This is a crafted argument. And you get some of this, and you're going to hear this in this next section too, where it goes in the first person and third person, and it's like he's talking about himself in a weird way, or the Johannine community is placing him in a role where he is the voice. But this is a narrated book in that regard, again, making an argument. The only thing I would say is in 2, the devil had already put it in the heart of Judas, the son of his, this is verse 2, the son of Iscariot to betray him. So this also reveals, to some extent, how evil works.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I had that, I flipped over to James, where he talks, God doesn't tempt anyone with evil, but he himself tempts no one, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. And so Judas clearly had some desires that opened up that temptation.
Well, and as we know, Judas wasn't looking to get Jesus
Right.
crucified.
Right.
You know, we crucified Judas because we feel like, he's out, let's get, he just wanted to shake him up a little. He thought if he got arrested, maybe that would, and honestly, as probably a political strategist, Judas is looking at it, and remember, he comes from the Maccabean line. They come from the zealots who want to have a military overthrow. So his actions are innocent in some regard, in the sense of he's just acting out in the way other Jews were. He wanted Jesus to be a political leader. But what's interesting about that is the devil already put it in his heart, meaning the accuser, the devil, the person, dark forces, have the capacity to insert things in people's hearts. Obviously, there has to be a susceptibility to it. Those of us who live in the Spirit, hopefully we're protected by that Spirit. But those who are not, means they're susceptible by it. And no one had the Spirit here other than what Christ gave them. And so then you see that he goes in here, and he knew, and so for he knew who, that is, as for he knew who was to betray him. For this reason, he said, "Not all of you are clean." Meaning, in another way, the Spirit isn't dwelling in you. And this goes back to whenever you talk about the Spirit, that's a notion of presence. What is the relationship? You could talk about this in relationship to our everyday lives. Sometimes you feel the Spirit very heavy in your life. That's the closeness of the Spirit. Why? Because you're dwelling in the Spirit. When you don't feel the Spirit, well, perhaps because at that moment you're not dwelling in the Spirit. We're dwelling in our flesh. It's some weird dichotomy between the two. Okay, let's start with 12. Anyone else going to pick up at 12? Okay, nice and loud. 12 to 20.
So when he had washed their feet and put on his robe and reclined at the table again, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right in doing so, for that is who I am. So if I, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet as well. For I gave you an example so that you should do as I did to you. I assure you, and most solemnly say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you put them into practice and faithfully do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but this in order that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has raised up the heel against me as my enemy. From now on, I am telling you before it occurs, so that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he, the Christ, the anointed, the Messiah. I assure you and most solemnly say to you, the one who receives and welcomes whomever I send receives me, and the one who receives me receives him who sent me.
Recurring theme, the oneness of Christ and the Father. I mean, it's thick. Are you feeling that? As we read this slower, you're feeling that? What else are you seeing in there? There's a couple of things on the other side.
You'll understand this later.
Yeah.
I'm telling you now, you'll get it later.
Yeah, it's always, the disciples were not bright, They were the working class fisher, uneducated, probably could barely, probably weren't literate.
And if you think about it, how many times have we heard it, and sometimes we don't understand it, and they're actually hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, and yet we judge them all the
It's gotta be
time.
really difficult.
So he's explaining what's going on there. He says, "Don't you know what I've done?" And they're like, "No, we don't have any clues." So, and you'll see that there's, for that is what I am. And you see the couple little I ams. They're not the big I ams, but they're not one of the seven, but they're smaller ones. And he said right there, "I've set as an example." In other words, he's not instituting it as something. This is what you ought to do. It's not the same as communion. It's an example of something. He says, I'm not speaking to all of you. I know whom I have chosen. This goes back again, for those of us in the Reformed camp of theology, I can't get away from predestination in some way. I'd like to, like for me, I'd much rather have an open system. Then it seems fair. Open system seems more fair to some extent to our earthly mindset. Whereas if God has preordained and chosen, you're like, well, that's not very nice to the ones who didn't get chosen. But then again, we're assessing that from with the 6% of our brain and our broken selves with all of the problems that we, have. Okay, anything else that you see that you want to talk about? Lifted a heel against me, going back to Eve lifting her heel against the serpent, a little Hebrew symbolism there. Okay, and then, this, basically, I'm the Father, the Father's me, if you receive me, I don't want to belabor that, that's the same stuff we hear, and, to us, it's commonplace. Okay, someone to read 21 through 30. Someone, Terry? I don't know.
After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter mentioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do quickly." Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night.
All right, anything you see? What are you thinking? Anything that stands out?
So Judas knew, obviously.
I don't think Judas knew fully. Judas knew he was up to something,
Well, but Judas now knows that
Jesus knows.
and Simon Peter now knows.
I don't think Simon Peter
Well,
knows.
Jesus told him, it'll be the one that I hand the bread to.
Well, he's probably saying that in front of everybody.
Oh, okay.
This is
But
where,
then he hands it to Judas.
yes, and this is where it gets a little confusing, because then you're like, is that the communion bread? And this is where, when you look at all the Eucharistic accounts, this account actually is adds more of confusion than not. Because, when I was doing the sacred meal, I took all of the communion texts and tried to put them in chronological order. John, once again, flips around the order. So because there's a way to interpret the Eucharist that it happened before Judas left, so Judas was included in that, and there's a way to look at it that bread was handed to him, and so the question is, did he receive it and then leave, or was it something that he said, go and do what you must do? I don't remember which gospel it was, and then he goes and then they have the meal.
So he took the body, Christ,
Theoretically, and according to John.
and didn't take the blood?
Well, we don't know. Again, he doesn't describe the narrative of what happened that night. That's...
Yeah, he did.
He did it.
That would be the blood.
No, I'm saying the rest. We don't know that the...
I've thought about this in years past. I can't get over the fact that Judas was set up.
Yeah.
Jesus was ordained for this.
Right, but Judas was just a human.
Yeah, he was.
He was just a human like all the
Yeah.
other disciples, but he was set up to become, the ultimate villain, of life.
Yeah. That's why people they say, your son Judas, and I'm like, really? You think I would name my son Judas? Like, who would do that?
Yes.
I'm interested in the fact that John said Satan entered into him.
Yeah, and I wouldn't read Satan as anytime you see Satan in the Bible, read it as the accuser. Because it's a broader term, and it doesn't necessarily mean the personification of Lucifer. Like, we want to hold on to this image of that there is, not that I don't deny that there is a being Lucifer that Job sort of points to, but I think that when it says Satan, what they mean is the accuser, and there are all sorts of levels of demonic powers that would operate.
So how would John presume to know that?
Well, everything, John's looking back at the whole thing with this, and this is where you get a unique perspective, you know, it's like, and then what I love in this passage, like I like other passages of John, where you remember when I have said one of my favorites is when they run to the tomb, and John has to make a point to say that he got there first. Again, he's showing off in the seating order, because seating order mattered in this culture, in this time. Whoever sat to the right and the left, this is what the disciples were arguing about, James and John, who will be at your right and your left. So it's one of the disciples, M dash, the one whom Jesus loved.
Yeah, I won't say it's me, it's just.
I'm not going to say, but he's talking about himself, and it's all throughout John. He's always talking about himself. He's talking about himself in third person. Was reclining next to him. So where is that? Placement next to Jesus. He's in a seat of importance. Simon Peter, who was not next to Jesus, therefore mentioned to him, because I couldn't say, hey, Al. Instead, I have to say, hey, Gary, can you ask Al something for me? Peter therefore mentioned him as Jesus, whom he was speaking. So while reclining next to Jesus, you know, it's kind of like, hey, John, could you talk to Jesus about something for me? And this is the part where I'm like, really? I'm pretty sure Simon Peter had the capacity to go up to Jesus and spring a question. It's a curated text, and it still demonstrates human ego, which I think is fascinating as far as a biblical document, that we're always present in those things that we write.
And you made the point, but John specifically paints the picture of Jesus handing the morsel to Judas.
Yeah.
And the Mark account is just Jesus saying, it's one of the 12, one who dips the bread in the cup with me. It's not singled out, you know.
Yeah.
Which also implies, was Judas sit on the other side of Jesus? That Jesus had reach. Because I would, you know, I wouldn't be like, hey, Judas over there, let me get up out of my seat and run over and make sure, you know, that's a little, you know, it's almost as if it was done in a subtle way. I have great compassion for Judas. And honestly, you know, as I hope, you know, I don't have a universal salvation fully in my theology, but for those who I hope that are included in salvation, I hope Judas is there. I hope he was.
I would see Jesus welcoming him.
But here's the other thing. If he's not, it's not for me to judge. And that is purely a Reformed perspective on theology. Calvin, when he wrote the Institutes of Christian Religion, he said, you can't even begin to think about theology if you don't start with the basis of humility. And what in academia we refer to as epistemic humility. Epistemology is the field of study of how we learn. So if you don't start with the posture of humility, then you read the scripture through your own ego. You have to start with a place of brokenness and of trusting that which is beyond yourself. So then I think just to note, just in terms of as it happens throughout, and it'll continue, verse 28, this is again, John, the curated nature of the text. Now, no one at the table knew why he was saying to him, so he's kind of like, he's filling in the narrative rather than just telling the story, and then you're left with questions. Did the other disciples know? Well, no. Why? How do we know this? You know, because you have almost a narrative retelling of what's happening, and John is interposing thoughts after the fact, or the Johannine community would be more likely. Okay, 31 to 35, short passage. Sorry, Chloe.
I was about to
I'm gonna
volunteer
volunteer
too. Mine's a little, the wording might be different.
Oh,
with
what? Are
the
you using
translation.
a heretical version or
I
something?
have CEB Student Bible.
Oh, we'll talk about that later. Just kidding.
When Judas was gone, Jesus said, "Now the human one has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify the human one in himself and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I'm with you for a little while longer. You will look for me, but just as I told the Jewish leaders, I also tell you now, where I'm going, you can't come. I give you a new commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you, so you must also love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other."
So it was said on Sunday, love is the ultimate. It's how we are known. They will know we are Christians by our love. So what about, so this first part, now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. And remember what just happened previous, this is not about Judas, to be
Well, I was gonna
clear.
say, why does it say now that Judas is left? It makes it sound.
I think it's just sort of saying, it's introducing the fact, it's a transition. Judas left, and now Jesus went into this teaching. So in the memory of John or the Johannine community, this teaching, the ultimate teaching of love one another. And again, this is not love your neighbor. They both come from the same base, but love one another is love the others who share in this Christian fellowship, who share in the Spirit. That's the first place of, if we can't love one another, I think this is why we're in such a crappy place in the world in terms of spirituality and religion. 3 different traditions, a bunch of different denominations, everyone judges everyone. We're all wrong. I mean, some more wrong than others, but we're all wrong. Just kidding. Yeah, Jim, no, he's not. But maybe he's listening later, this is for you. But that, again, that goes back to what I just said a few minutes ago. It's about the humility. This is why I am a part of the Reformed tradition. Because I would like that basis of, in the end, I don't really know. I think that even with all of my schooling, with all of my thinking, I live a life of theological engagement. You know, I'm probably in the 1.001 percentile of the world who actually lives, and I think I'm wrong probably most of it. Like I say, 90%. I never claim more than 90. It's a good thing to say. You always have 10% error. 90% is still an A in some scales.
So how do we know Jesus loved Judas?
I think Jesus' love and compassion extended to everyone. But, yeah.
So if you go to what we just read, Judas was in the room, and Jesus said, having loved them,
Yeah.
he
Oh, that's
washed his
good.
feet. He was included in the people that he washed his feet. Right?
Yeah. Conceivably,
Yeah.
that he went around and washed his feet. And I think that's, and I don't think Jesus saw Judas as an enemy. I mean, here's the thing. And I know I keep harping on this sort of otherworldly thing, but if you truly have the mindset of this isn't your world, and if you truly fully, then no, you wouldn't fear. If I die, then I die.
Well, in order for Jesus to be crucified and die for our sins, if it wasn't Judas, it was somebody else. Somebody had to send him to jail and get him crucified.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, is that could have been tipped in any other direction. Why God chose that, I mean, there are some pieces of that fit with Old Testament prophecy that sort of betrayal in that regard. I don't believe has a direct comparison, but it does say to fulfill God's will. In other words, God's watching this social narrative that's unfolding, and God can poke things and make things happen. What it tells us from that 20, 30,000 foot view is how God intersects in the world. That there, again, going back to the Spirit is moving both in Judas, and we'll see in a second as Jesus is saying, I'm going to send you out, and I send my Spirit the Spirit is going with him. And until the Pentecost happened, no one was consistently and constantly filled with the Spirit. And I'm not saying it's like a video game where your meter's going down until you're depleted, and then you're like, oh, you're out of spirit. I guess I'm on my own. But to some extent, that's probably what it was. I mean, it faded, and I would say the new commandment though is and that's what did he say? Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is what Jesus was preaching. The new commandment is the extra commandment. So that has to be held in relationship. They had 10, the Decalogue, and then they had all the Levitical laws. Jesus is saying, it sums up, now it's not just love your neighbor, because you can be like, well, is this my neighbor? It's not my neighbor.
Higher standard.
It is raising it up. He's saying, like, look, this is, and again, how much division is there between Christians in this world and in our country? But if everyone truly understood this is not our world, you can understand. That's why we don't fear death. Why we can celebrate when someone dies. They're in a better, not just they're in a better place, oh, pie in the sky. No, they've gone on to the fullness of their life. This is why funeral services are a service and witness to the resurrection, because it is a communal confirmation, communal affirmation of a doctrine that we believe in the resurrection of the body. All right. Okay, there's a little, I'll just read it real quick, because it's a little blip. Foretell Peter's denial. Verse 36, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I'm going, you can't go to me now. He's talking about the ascension, but you will follow afterwards. Promise of the resurrection. Peter said to him, why can't I follow you now? Always Peter, always pushing the envelope. He's just a little bit, come on, man, I want to go. I will lay down my life for you. And then Jesus is like, all right, punk. You lay down your life for me? Very true, though. I'll tell you, before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Now, this is the end of the narrative. This is kind of shortchanged. If you're listening to this, you're like, what happened? Like, there was no response to that? There was no lead up to that? It just kind of, 3 verses that kind of throws you in the midst of it. But we know this from other places. And this also demonstrates, outside of the narrative itself, it demonstrates Jesus' foreknowledge.
And poor Peter, how he must have felt when Jesus said that to him. What do you mean you'll lay your life down for me? Yeah, sure. I mean,
Peter's the most broken of the bunch.
yeah.
And this is not surprising then that Jesus would say, upon you I'm going to build my church. Because Jesus always uses the most broken one. So, all right, do I have another reader? Anyone? Online, you can read too if you really want to jump in there. 14, we're going to go 14:1 to 14:14.
I can do it if no one else.
All right, you got a short one before you can read it.
14:14?
14:1 to 14:14.
Don't be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. My Father's house has room to spare. If that weren't the case, I would have told you, I'm going to prepare a place for you. When I go to prepare a place for you, I will return and take you to be with me, so that where I am going, you will be too. You know the way to the place I'm going. Thomas asked, Lord, we don't know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you have really known me, you will also know the Father. From now on, you will know him and have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father. That will be enough for us. Jesus replied, Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been with you all this time? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I have spoken to you, I don't speak on my own. The Father who dwells in me does his works. Trust me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on account of the works themselves. I assure you that whoever believes in me will do works that I do. They will even do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask for in my name, so that the Father can be glorified in the Son. When you do ask me for anything in my name, I will do it.
All right. Thank you, Clay.
So confusing.
This is a horribly confusing passage.
Well, but to them, I mean, think about
Even to
what
us.
they're saying. Yeah, I mean, you should know the Father, it's me, and they're looking at him going, you're the Father? Wait a minute, you're Jesus. I can only imagine how confused they were.
Yeah. Oh, because no one had really been incarnated in this way before. So this is a whole, and the whole time you got to be like, in the same way, there's always, I always say, there's always a little bit of doubt in everyone. No one has 100% faith, because the minute you reach 100%, it's no longer faith. Got to have a little doubt. So they must have been like, I don't get it. Like, he says this, but he's doing some crazy stuff. And they had to feel the Spirit, probably in a way that, we sort of take, for granted. You have one of the main statements. Jesus said to him in 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I think we often rattle that off without thinking about the implications of each of those statements. I am the way. That means there's not. Now, Christian pluralists will say that will translate that and say that he meant I am a way, or I am the main way. But this is what, again, when we talked about other religions, was it 2 summers ago, that was the main distinction we kept coming back to. This is what makes Christians different. We don't have to deny all the other, revelations that are in the world. I think spirit world is live and active, and people receive things. But regardless of what happens in the world, what has happened in the world, the only way, is through Christ Jesus, because that is the fullest representation, revelation of who God is. The truth. Remember that Jesus was the Logos through which the world was created, and when the Logos came into the world, the logic was revealed in the world, and that's truth. So we often talk about science and factual things. We want to say that these are things that we understand as being, water has certain properties, fire does certain things. There are natural laws, and this is truth. You're like, well, you can't deny that. When rain falls, I'm going to get wet. That's truth. That's a fact. The truth is coming to the world, the truth of the other world, so if you understand Christ as the logic or the word or the means of understanding the world coming into the world, then he's saying, now I'm opening this up to you. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And this goes back in juxtaposition to the curse of death. That you've been cursed with the death, but no, I am the life. I'm the bread of life. It's that constant pointing to life. Anything else in there that stood out to you?
Well, just leading into it, and I'm borrowing from what I've heard before, and I'm interested in your take on this, that that first part of chapter 14 can be taken as a cultural marriage reference, where the husband goes and does the addition to the father's house, then gets the bride to be with them. So he's saying, where I'm going to prepare a place, and if I do, I'll come back, and then you'll be with me there.
Yeah.
So they did have some context in how that language is used there.
Yeah, and in some versions it says, I'm going to in my father's mansion or house. That idea that there, and I think that's why we have a physical image of what heaven would be like. So it's kind of like, is Jesus really up there constructing things? Probably not. Is there a whole other world being created? Probably not, because it talks about the obliteration of this world and sort of that new creation. And I don't know whether it uses the same level of matter. Like the notion that there's only so much water in the world and it just continually gets moved around and recycled. There's a boundary that's set. God knows to the exact ounce how much water is in this world. And in the same way as it's being created. But again, those things don't matter. What is communicated, and I think the juxtaposition of this 14:1, do not let your heart be troubled, and you go back to 13:21, after saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit. So it's not that they're weak and being troubled; they're showing his humanness. He still struggled with he feels the emotion of humanity.
You can sort of see where the disciples thought that he was coming back pretty soon. This sounds like it's going to happen in a pretty near future.
Yeah.
He's going to prepare a place for you.
Well, in particular, if this was written in, let's say, between 90 and 110, or whenever it was sort of composed and brought together in the full formulation, any books that are written around the turn of the century have an apocalyptic feel. Temple was destroyed in 72. They're going under persecution. It's increasing. Greek influences are more powerful. And why you think John, Revelation came around? I joked that he was tripping when he wrote it, but that was a vision for the end time. So yes, the New Testament church that you see over the last 30 years was living their lives in a way that Christ would come back tomorrow. I don't think we do that. And again, if we knew he was coming back, I think we would live differently.
Is there a reference in the Old Testament to Father?
Yes, but not in the same relational way. It's like father of a nation or father of a people. And so that relationship changes in the New Testament when you have the notion of the Son and the Father, because you all of a sudden see a different type of relationality in God. And this is why John emphasizes that oneness that exists between them, that although there is a difference in personhood, Father and Son, and then Spirit, that there are three different sort of entities of the same thing, but that relational nature, and this is why, and I know that I do it, and I always catch myself, but I just let it slide sometimes, but people do it all the time, casually. They call Jesus they'll say, Jesus is our brother. Yahweh is the Father, is the Trinitarian, is the head, that sense of, and to be honest with you, I think the notion of Father, Son is an accommodation for us because we probably don't really have the capacity to understand their relationship. Everything in this is an accommodation to our stupidity. So, I mean, even the Spirit, like we're talking about the Spirit, we imagine the Spirit. And again, I said, the Spirit is the one we should be praying to the Father because of the Son through the Spirit. But even that is probably broken in some sense. I think even our notions of the Trinity probably are not really. That's why people move away. And there was a big move even in the Presbyterian Church back in early 2000s to move away. And it was gender neutrality was sort of the argument, those who have issues with their father. And I think that's a 100% valid argument to some extent. But I also say that Jesus referred to God as the Father, so I'm going to use the language that Jesus uses and try to restore that image. So I'm not into getting rid of it, which is why we still Father, Son, Spirit and everything we do here. But there are many who move to Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, is that it places their activity as being the major function or the major expression. But there are lots of ways to understand the Trinity.
You can see where they really wouldn't have a clue what he's talking about.
No, they're thinking you're nutso.
These paragraphs, more than any of the others, suits John's purpose of really emphasizing Jesus' divinity more than the other gospel writers.
Yeah.
And the onlyness of the way,
Well, in part, this is because of the influence of Greco-Roman culture, which also influenced the writing of these things. I mean, it's again, the Gnosticism, that dualism of the world that we see here and we see in Paul, highly influential. So the divinity was important because out through the first few centuries of the church, you see it develop. There are questions about Jesus that he was just an appearance of a human. There's an insistence that gets doubled down on in the Council of Nicaea in 325 that says no. And then actually again in the Council of Chalcedonia where it says Jesus is 100% God and man or human because of heresies that rose around the idea. And this is why John's gospel becomes so important. Probably why also he's emphasizing both in here the divine nature, and later we see people, emphasis on the human nature to kind of cover both sides. But Jesus had to be divine. If Jesus wasn't divine, and if you watered that down or reduced that, you lose the efficaciousness of the crucifixion. It had to be someone divine and human.
So is this the first mention of Thomas as a character in John? Where it says, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Kind of setting him up as the doubting Thomas?
I would say that's fair. I hadn't thought about that, but that's probably fair.
Well, didn't we cover last week where Thomas said, let us all go with him so we can die?
Yes, that was when so that was probably the first mention. But that demonstrates his rashness too. Thomas was shooting from the hip. All right, we've read this over the past few weeks, almost the entirety, so I'll read it and just make a few comments so we won't belabor it. But verse 15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. I talked about this in church, that the very notion of discipleship is keeping the commandments. What are the commandments? Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, love your neighbor yourself, and love one another. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate, meaning that Jesus was the advocate. Again, legal language, going back to that legal motif. Another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth. And the Spirit of truth, and Jesus says, I am the truth. And now he says, this is the Spirit of truth. In other words, the Spirit of truth will help you see and understand the truth. It's not understood before this. For whom the world cannot receive, and although I believe the Spirit is in the world, I don't believe the Spirit has received the world in the way we have. The Spirit is dwelling in and active and regenerative in us. This is the Spirit of truth whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him or knows him. You know him because he abides in you. Again, the distance of dwelling, and we'll get to that with the vine and the branches here shortly. And he will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. And this is important because throughout the New Testament scriptures, you have this notion of we've been adopted and engrafted in. So we won't be left as orphans. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I live in you, because you also live in me. On that day, you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. those who have my commandments, they who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself in them. Judas, not Iscariot, is important, again, said to him, Lord, how is it that you reveal yourself to us and not the world? And Jesus answered him, those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our homes with them. That's a pretty important thing. When, again, talking about the notion of presence, we're going to live, we're not going to have our dwelling place in the heavens. Is the earth the dwelling place of God? No. Momentarily in the ark, maybe in the tabernacle, now in us, in a spiritual way, but the Trinitarian God, that perichoretical God, is going to dwell in us and live with us. So that's that presence thing. Whoever does not love me and does not keep my words, the word that you hear is not mine, but is the Father who sent me. Again, making the connection. I've said these things to you while I'm still with you, but the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you all that I have said to you. Now, this is just a point where the Orthodox Church would take this passage and say that the Spirit was coming from the Father, because the Spirit was with the Father. And so Jesus is down here, the Father's up here, Spirit's up there. Jesus is going back up, the Spirit's coming down. So the Orthodox would say the Spirit that's coming down is the Spirit of the Father. That's the Eastern Church, Orthodox, Greek, Macedonian, Antiochian, all those. The Western Church says, no, the Spirit is the Father and the Sons. This is a passage that supports the notion on the Orthodox side that it's just the Father. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, which is, again, a huge gift that we take for granted. I do not give you as the world gives. I mean, I like that juxtaposition of saying, hey, the world gives you this, I don't give you. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Again, troubled spirit, 13, their hearts were troubled. He's feeling their anxiety. Do not let them be afraid. You heard me say, I'm going away and I'm coming to you. If you love me, you rejoice that I'm going to my Father, because the Father is greater than I. This is where you also get the heresies of Jesus being subordinate, sitting at the right hand of the Father is greater than I. Now, the question, and those who would defend it as still an egalitarian, that they're both equal, would say that Jesus was speaking in his current human state, that at that moment, that the Father was greater. And now I've told you this before it occurs, so that when it does occur, you may believe. And so this is interesting. He's projecting things, but the belief doesn't come until eyewitness account of it. So then it's like a confirmation of what Jesus said. I will no longer talk much with you. I like that. For the ruler of the world is coming. He's talking about Satan or Lucifer, the accuser, whatever personification you want to hold there. He has no power over me, but I do as the Father has commanded me, so that the world may know that I love the Father. Rise, let us be on our way. Scene shift. Everyone goes off, exit stage right.
So that's, okay, go ahead and do that
Going
now.
back when he says Judas, not Iscariot,
Not Iscariot.
Iscariot, what does that mean?
That's a Judas who betrayed him. That's his name, Judas of Iscariot.
Judas.
Of the fan.
There's two Jews.
Oh, there's two Judas.
It wasn't a bad name back then. Everyone was
A
Judas.
different Judas.
Like, yeah, 3 Judases now. What are we going to do with them?
Okay.
A couple of Johns.
A couple John, yeah. Too many Peters. Let's give that one a new name so we know. Now we know. Yeah, lots of Marys. Too many Marys. None of these names were probably their names. Just like Jesus' name isn't Jesus.
So somewhere in here, it was saying that the Father won't be here, that Satan, that Satan will be coming?
You're talking about at the end there. I'll no longer talk. I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming. He has no power over me, but I do as the Father has commanded
But
me.
that's implying
For the
Satan.
ruler of the world, Satan is coming.
Yes, the ruler of the
Okay,
world.
so-
Because he still was the ruler of the
So
physical world.
So in the Apostles' Creed, when you say he descended into hell, that ties to that.
That's when the dominion was broken. That doesn't mean he still doesn't have capacity to act, but his power. In other words, it's kind of like the end has been determined.
So up until this point, Satan had the power over
Oh, over everything.
Yeah, it happened in the Garden of Eden.
He gave dominion over and said, you run with it. This is the larger issue is the question around, again, God's providence. So there's divine foreknowledge. There's providence, God ordains everything. There's foreknowledge that the world sort of unfolds on its own and God gets to see ahead. There's divine permission, which says God, and that you get that from Job, you get that from passages like this where God's like allowing it to happen. So then, it's like, oh, well, I'm not the cause of sin, I'm just allowing it to take place. And then there's just willy-nilly, then you get into, which I actually kind of like personally for a variety of reasons, process theology, which says God, having the capacity to know all, has self-limited and is watching the history of time in the world play itself out and interacting in that world as a legitimate agent or legitimate actor. Obviously an all-powerful one. It's not a bad, and actually it's a theology that really solves a lot of issues. Because then God, I struggle with divine permission. Well, yeah, sure, like, hey, I'm gonna let something bad happen to you because I know something good will come out of it. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not what's happening, Judas, other things. Divine foreknowledge says kind of in the vein that God's watching it happen or letting it in, and then sort of knows. But then that means it's a higher level of free will, and then Jesus and, the God in any form is looking ahead, seeing what's going to happen, and then talking about it in the present. But that also implies that things are somewhat set. Because as you know, if you make a left turn or a right turn, you get into an accident, you're like, what if I had made the right turn and circled around the block one more time? Well, you probably wouldn't have gotten in the accident. So those decisions have butterfly effect. So the question becomes, then, are we back if you're saying God just sort of foreknows? Wasn't that just divine providence? If God foreknows, it's because God ordains. But the permission is there. And so I think that, again, there's a balance between what is actually ordained and what people have free will. All right, anything else in there? We have time for 15. We made it. And 15 is not huge. It's only like 27 chapters or verses. So this is one of my favorite parables or pictures. I really love this. I've used it a lot. This is another one you see in a lot of Sunday school material. It's about, and I think it's a great example of connectivity, bearing fruit, pruning, the whole church. It's a great metaphor. Obviously, for those of us who don't grow things on a regular basis, aren't agrarian in our vocations, will probably appreciate it less than those who are. That's why we use a lot of sports metaphors, these days, because people understand them more. If Jesus was here, he'd be talking about sport metaphors, not vines. Anyway, he's like, I am the true fan. I'm just kidding. So let's have, who wants to read? Anyone? You gotta have nice and loud.
I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleaned by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I love you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete.
Yeah, it's good stuff. All right, familiar passage for many, anything stand out?
Well, it makes it very easy for them to understand after all the confusing things that he said.
He gives a clear example.
This makes it very clear, yeah.
Seems a little transactional, though.
What's that?
I mean, just that if you abide in me, anything you ask in God's name, I'll give to you. I mean, it's very, it just doesn't fit with my understanding of the way the world works.
Yeah. No, yeah, go on, Terry.
What's your definition of abide?
Stay with, in.
Because if abide is dwell.
Meno, dwell, yeah.
Yeah.
Abide,
So
remain.
if you live in me, right, I mean, that is a surrendering of yourself into him.
Yeah.
In this version, it said, remain in me and I will remain in you.
Yeah.
So it's, abide means,
I think there's a sense of the Spirit dwells in us. In what ways do we dwell in the Spirit? I think sometimes it's like we're the vessel, the Spirit dwells in us, we're actors, but there's a sense of, this is why, honestly, I think probably why I've been drawn so much. I grew up praying an hour as a morning, and as a sophomore in high school, I prayed an hour a day.
Is that why you hate mornings?
That's why I hate mornings so much. I used to get up at 5:30 in the morning, go up to the church, I had this thing, 5-minute sections of prayer, I'd pray for 5 minutes, go through 20 sections. But the presence of the Spirit, all that's to say is, I came from a pretty rigid sort of, this is how you pray. Put a timer on yourself, words matter. That's how I learned to pray. I'm not saying any of that's bad. When I encountered the Taizé community, this is why I'm very big on Taizé, is because it gave me a new way of praying. It changed my understanding of prayer. There's a dwelling that in a spiritual dwelling that I don't feel like is often captured. Growing up in the Pentecostal church, I can probably go back to places where I felt the thickness of the Spirit, where you just, there was just something about it. There was a sense of being full of the Spirit, of dwelling in the Spirit. And I remember sitting at camps, as a high schooler, and, the services for the evening, I think, started at 8, and you usually had an hour sermon, then they do an altar call. I remember times being there at 12:01 and just dwelling in this, the Spirit of it. And some of you are like, well, you may not see my spirituality in that way now. I think that same sense of dwelling in the Spirit comes to me when people enter into the prayers that Taizé prayers are meant to enter into. Again, this is something sometimes we sing these things sort of as a hymn or just words or, sort of a spoken prayer, but they're meant to be like a groaning, dwelling prayer. And I think that sense of abiding is really, this is where I think monks and sisters and nuns, I think there's that sense of remaining in that constant connection. I don't think we can all live in that. I think it's an unrealistic perspective. I don't think it's the world we live in. But I think they stand as a shining example of some in the world who commit themselves to that deep dwelling, remaining.
And that's why I asked the question about the definition of abide, because because you could look at this and say, if you bring me this request, then I'll give it to you, right? But it's all based on that communion relationship. And the other part about it, I think he's laying a foundation. It doesn't say, go and bear fruit, and when I see the fruit, then you can be part of the vine. It's not a works.
No.
It's clearly because of that abiding relationship, then you bear the fruit.
Yeah, you kind of retroactively look back and you understand things. I mean, the fruit is the goal, the fruit, no, the goal is abiding. The fruit is a result of it. It's kind of like playing a board game. The goal is not really to win the board game. Yes, momentarily it is, But the real activity that board game is engaging in the board game itself. The process of discipleship is not, I've reached this level of discipleship, it's a constant dwelling and remaining. Yeah, Hugh.
I see this as the genesis of guilt for some people who don't think they're trying to abide in the.
Oh, you mean in the terms of the asking, my
Yeah,
Father?
they're trying to abide in the Spirit, but something bad happens and they begin to self-doubt and wonder if they have caused, because of their inability to live up to this command, or their perceived inability to live up to it, that in some way that has caused negative things to occur, which creates guilt.
So let me reframe this passage in a way that I think is helpful for us in present day times. This isn't for us. Theoretically, it could be for us. This is not denying the probability that if we truly dwelled in the Spirit in which Christ was calling us to, that whatever we asked, but if we were truly dwelling in the thickness, in the fullness of that Spirit, the things we ask would only be for the kingdom. The more we, and so the things that we often ask, and this is not belittling someone who needs healing, but asking for God to heal someone. You know what? God's going to heal. Ben, you healed because you healed, because your body is designed. Same with you, Sharon. Your ankle healed because that's what God, the miracle is God designed this incredible system so that it would heal itself. That's the miracle. That's what we should be praising. That's what it means to be praising God all the time. But if I didn't say that prayer on a Sunday morning and no one in the church prayed for you, you know what? You would have still healed. Sometimes we get our alignment of what we ask for out of whack. I told this story when I went to see the brothers. I was going through this big transition, and in the end, he's like, Lord, he didn't even say my name, just basically give Jason some peace. And I'm like, what? I just shared with you for an hour about my sob story of what's going on in my life, and that's the level of detail you add for your 5-minute, for your 2-minute prayer. I was like, what a ripoff. Sorry, Brother John, if you're watching. But it taught me something about prayer. Prayer is something different. Prayer is, sometimes we think it is. God's our divine butler. Should we pray for traveling mercies? Yes. Should we thank God for safe passage? Yes. Should we say, I only got here because I prayed safely? No. That's ridiculousness. If you get in an accident, even if you prayed, does that mean your prayer was crappy and you did something bad? No, this is, again, working down to the legal system of, and also in the superstitious system of what cause and effect. Now, I'm not saying that there's not cause and effect, and I'm not saying there's not karma. Because I think the spirits of the world can produce karma in a way that what you reap is what you sow, in a way that we do not understand. That's not what he's talking about. And the way I think this passage is best understood is Jesus is talking to the disciples, not to us. He is saying, in a moment, I'm leaving. You can't go. But don't let your hearts be troubled. I'm going to give you my Spirit. You continue in this stage, I think really kind of until the Spirit came and until Pentecost. For those 50 days, you dwell in me over the next 50 days after I depart, or over this next period. And if you ask for something, I'm with you. And I think the Spirit was dwelling heavily. And I think when the Spirit came down, I go back to the old notion when Peter kills Ananias and Sapphira because they lie about a plot of land that they didn't give it all to the church. How many of us lie about our own, there's all sorts of, if the Spirit was killing people for lying on little things like that, then I think half the Christian world would probably get smacked down. Because we've all told little lies. We've all held back. We've all not fully, I think that Peter was so filled with the Spirit that he got angry, and that Spirit was so powerful on him and that it actually came out in a dark form. Because why else? Because other words, no one would be lying for that would have been like a doctrine. Don't lie about giving to the church. The Spirit was heavy. Jesus was talking to the disciples. He was about to leave. He was preparing to them, saying, dwell in me. And he's using a constant metaphor. All right, we're almost to the end here. This is perfect timing. Someone 12 to 17.
This is my commandment,
Thank you.
that you love one another as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I've heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another.
Great. Doubling down again, love one another. And again, you see the providential passage 16, you did not choose me, but I chose you. Again, one of the main reasons as I studied providence why I ended up being a Presbyterian. Lutherans would say God chose, but we have the capacity to resist. Roman Catholics would say that it's free will all across the board. Anyone can choose. Those purely Reformed perspective says, nope, there are some that God's chosen. I remember a professor said that I had saying, I don't know how I could deny Christ. Like, I would have to be like delusional. How could I possibly deny that which is so deeply in me?
But Jason, if you go back and you said, he's speaking to the disciples.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So.
You're right.
He chose the disciples, and can we take that and make it apply?
No, I think you're right. Well, no, and that's a very good point. Although I think it's hard to say where God chooses and God doesn't, and there are other places in Scripture that confirm God's providence and a chosen people. I mean, there's a number even, and even where the number is actual itself or just a representation. But this could be applied in the same spirit, and I think it probably is more faithfully done. He's talking to the disciples. It's kind of like when it says, David writes that God knew you before my mother's womb, and we always like to say that to make ourselves feel special. I'm so special. God knew me. Well, of course, no, duh. God knows everything. God knows if God knows every raindrop that falls, God knows you before you're in your mother's womb. But we twist and turn that because we want to make people feel good. Coming out of the era of Jonathan Edwards, where everyone felt crappy. Okay, and the other thing I would say about this is, you ask anything in my name. I've said this before. I struggle with this. God's name was not Jesus. That is not his name. No one, and Jesus' entire life, from the moment he understood someone calling him to the moment he died on this earth and ascended, no one used the words or the sounds or the letters Jesus. Chew on that. That'll keep you up at night. Because then part of me is like, well, maybe we're not, maybe there's something to do with names. This is Jason's, late night musings. But I'm like, well, maybe if we use the term Yahshua, that's what it would have been. Maybe if we as a culture, as a nation, as a faith, switch that up. I mean, I'm not going to make that movement, but it got to make you wonder. If he's like, use my name, is it just a spirit? Well, if we renamed him because it's a transliteration, Jesus. Well, what if in a transliteration of does that mean we get to call Jesus anything we want?
Well, hold it for 1712.
Yeah. Why? What's 17:12 say?
Because it's in the high priestly prayer where he says, while I was with them, I kept them in your name, which you have given me.
Yeah, the elevation of his name.
Yeah.
Yet all of our songs, all of our theology, all of the whole Scripture. You want to talk about an error in Scripture? Forget King James giving Jacobus the name James. They changed Jesus' name to something else. I often wonder if Jesus is up the right hand of the Father, like, hey, dummies, you know what my name is. Stop calling me Jesus. That's a baseball player in Cuba. I'm just saying.
There's some kind of parallel here between the trail names that are hikers.
Yeah, there may be. That was Jesus. This was Jesus' trail name. Jesus was the trail. I don't know. Yeah, but no, I don't think so. That's not going to fly. Yeah. All right. I'll just read the last part. If the world hates you, be aware that it hated me before it hated you. I got to say that I feel that as a pastor here in Lake City, there are people who, no matter how much kindness I show them, always are abrasive towards me. And Shannon and I have talked about that, and she says they're probably more abrasive towards God. And even though you're a nice person to them, they just still can't get over the fact that you represent something that they can't stomach.
But you'll find that wherever you go.
Yeah, wherever you go. But more acutely in a 400-person town when you're one of the local pastors.
Jason?
Yeah.
Back in the really old days, in the 40s, there was a minister in our church, and there was such feeling against him.
In this church here.
Yes, Presbyterian church. they would throw their beer cans into his yard.
I wouldn't mind that if they were full.
No, but I mean, it was an outright
Sometimes the best way to start off.
derogatory
Yeah.
thing to do
Now we're
to
talking.
him.
Yeah,
So you at least start getting.
that's true.
Beer cans in your yard.
That was before we were in the congregation.
Yeah, there you go. All right, if you belong to the world will love you as its own. And I think that in a world of Christianity where relevance over the last 2 decades has been a main grab for the church, how are we more relevant? I believe in relevance and contextualization, but not relevance and popularity. And this is the problem we live in the West, is we have made Christianity the norm. Therefore, we remove persecution. And in the name of establishing God's kingdom, but there's a challenge in that, because how do you rectify that with God's call to suffering and this sort of passage here? Verse 19b, because you do not belong to the world. Again, I say that again, and this is not our world, but I have chosen you out of the world. I mean, let's apply that just to the disciples for this sake. Therefore, the world hates you. And put it in the context of them coming into the world, their Jewish world hated them.
Yeah.
The Roman world hated them because they were Jews. So it means they're getting hate on all sides. Remember the words that I've sent you. Servants are not greater than their master, which is a pretty powerful statement. Because that's not the way we view it in the world. A servant, an employee of a boss, there's a power difference. Servant, master, power difference. You want to put it in the slavery context, power difference. And Jesus is saying, I'm obliterating that power difference. Why? Because this isn't our world. It doesn't matter. If they persecute me, they will persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But they will do these things to you on account of my name, his actual name, because they do not know because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sin. Meaning that he's revealing what sin truly is. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me, so meaning the Jews in particular in this case, hates my Father also. So they're saying the Jews who proclaim to really follow God are actually hating him and hating me. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not, if I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not have sin. But now they have seen and hated me and my Father. And basically he's saying that I've done these works. They've been given the signs they needed to believe, but they still didn't have the belief. And again, Paul talks about this as God allowing that to happen so the Gentiles might be included. It was to fulfill the word that was written in their law. They hated me without cause. When the advocate comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, again, Father's Spirit, is he going back up? The Spirit of the truth who comes down from the Father, he will testify on my behalf. So he becomes the internal authentication of the Scripture, of the whole story, of the narrative. There's a theological term called the Scriptures are self-authenticating, and that's the Spirit telling us within us that they are true. You'll testify on my behalf. You also are to testify because you have been with me from the beginning. Again, this is John emphasizing that eyewitness account. We are relying on the eyewitness account and the Spirit's movement in that eyewitness account. These are testimonies of eyewitness accounts. And even they're not, because Paul only had a spiritual encounter. So we base our belief on the testimony of human individuals who we believe were filled by the Spirit and recorded this. And that's an important part of it.
And this is where he's saying, prior to me educating you guys, you didn't know sin because you didn't have.
In the same way Paul says that prior the Israelites or those in the world didn't know sin until the Ten Commandments. No one was held, and now Jesus is saying, well, you thought this was the system that kind of just kept you in line. It's like, I'm going to give you something, because they're stupid. They didn't understand. They didn't have the Spirit enlightening them. So it was like, this will keep you in line. But now he's saying, now you know what is sin, because sin is not breaking these things. And we'll talk about this in the sin series. I think sometimes we look at this material world that is not ours and we create systems of sin to judge others, to make ourselves more righteous. Well, we're just participating in the law. This is why I think if really not picking up that wrapper as you walk by because you want to preserve your own time, don't want to get your fingers dirty, you're placing your experience your self-preservation over and against the betterment or the good. We'll get into this, the fruit of the Spirit, the goodness. What is goodness? Good is choosing that good over. Is that sin? Yeah. Are you going to go to hell for it? No. Does God hate you for it? No. God sees us and says, oh, they're selfish beings. I still love them anyways. But this is the notion, the Reformed notion of the idea that sin wipes over all. The crucifixion covered over all sin. And so all sin is covered, even you not picking up that piece of paper. That doesn't mean you should go out and murder someone, because there are consequences. So no rash decisions this evening, folks. All right, that's it for today.
Thank you.
So we got 3 chapters.